Will you join me in prayer as we get ready to start today? Gracious Father, I am so thankful for your presence in our midst, for your ministry to our hearts and in unifying us as a family. We give you this morning, I pray for our dear pastor and brother. I pray that you would bring your word with it, inspiration, and change us through it. Open our hearts, our minds, our ears, our eyes to the depth of the truth therein. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Diana. All right. Let's turn to Isaiah 5. So last week, we simply noted that when Isaiah brings this prophecy, he does it in the form of a song. And we spent some time looking just at the issue of the prophetic nature of music and its tremendous spiritual power. So I hope that was helpful and informative. And I've heard some good reports since then of how that's impacting people's lives. So that's good, and we're delighted to know those things. This morning, what we want to do is get into the lyric of the song. And we'll approach that in a couple of ways. In Isaiah 5, let's go to verse 1 and note the song's opening. Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. So good to know right at the outset we've got a love song, right? But it's an unusual love song, isn't it? Because it contains notions of judgment. Let's remember where we are in this wider section of Isaiah. We're about to get to the center point of the first 12, what we would think of as 12 chapters. That's the way it's divided for us. Chapters and verses, remember, were not part of the original text. They come much, much later. Scholars introducing those just to help us find our place in the Bible. But this wider literary section runs 1 to 12. The heart of it, the very middle of it, is Isaiah 6, the call of Isaiah, and what he experiences personally in terms of seeing who the Lord is, having his sin exposed, cleansed by fire, and then commissioned for his work among the nations, is Israel's own story. That's their story too, not just Isaiah's story. So we're almost to that center point. So we come now to this song, and this song recapitulates all of those themes that are part of this big central section of glory and sin and judgment and cleansing and restoration. So if we look at the first 7 verses, we'll get the song itself. And let's note the center section. The center section of the song is verses 3 and the first line of verse 4. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done for it? When I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? So let's talk about that for just a second. Does anybody have anything different than wild? Sorry, what? Bad grapes, wild grapes. Okay, so, Worthless is a good word too. Okay, so let's talk about what that looked like. Because you might think, well, they just tasted bad, kind of sour or something like that. Okay, well, what it looked like was this. It was a grape that had the skin on it, so it looked right. But beneath the skin, there was no fruit. It was simply a giant seed or pit. So it has the appearance of being beautiful and juicy and delicious, but as soon as you took one of those grapes and bit it, what did you encounter? You could break your teeth on that thing. It's just a pit, all right? So what had happened was Everything that went as nourishment into the soil and then into the vine to produce fruit, rather than producing fruit, just produced more seed. So there's a storing up of the nourishment without the production of the fruit. That's what it looked like. Lots of nourishment, no fruit. Of course, thankfully, this doesn't describe the church today. Lots of good sermons, no fruit. Remember, what does Judah look like at this time? Does it look like things are bad? No. Militarily, economically, all of it appears to be good. But underneath, remember, the underlying reality is that things are not as they appear. Hence, wild grapes. They look good. They appear to be the kinds of grapes that would produce a remarkable vintage, but they're worthless. They're worthless. You can't use them for anything. So, we need to note that right at the outset. And then let's talk about why the prophet uses a vine and vineyard theology. The vine is one of the most important emblems in the Bible, and it is to this day in Israel one of the most important emblems of the people of Israel. The vine, a cluster of rich fruit from the vine, and so on. It is one of those symbols in the Bible that runs from Genesis all the way to Revelation. Whether we're talking about a cup of wrath, or in Deuteronomy, the blood of grapes, there is this instruction and word from the Lord using this imagery that is continuously set before us. Jesus says, in fact, I am the vine and you are the branches. And he talks about us being people who bear fruit. When Jesus talks about that in John chapter 15, he has this song in view, along with other passages as well. So we need to stop for just a moment before we dig into the rest of this in Isaiah 5 and just do a little bit of groundwork, if you will, on vineyard theology. What is so central about this? Why is it so important? And central to this, I think, is the 80th Psalm. So let's turn over to Psalm 80. Let's go back just a little bit here. And this is a psalm which would be later than Isaiah because it has in view the captivity which takes place and then the restoration. Remember, Isaiah sees Judah and Israel as nations destined for demolition and exile and then restoration. This song is one of the psalms that has that in view as well. So in Psalm 80, let's pick it up. Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock, you who are enthroned upon the cherubim, shine forth before Ephraim and Benjamin and Manasseh. Stir up your might and come to save us. Restore us, O God. Let your face shine, that we may be saved. So we have a prayer in this song for restoration and recovery. God is the one who is enthroned in the Holy of Holies. That's what the reference is there to between the cherubim. Lord, your presence is what we need. O Lord God of hosts, how long will you be angry with your people's prayers? You have fed them with the bread of tears and given them tears to drink in full measure. You make us an object of contention for our neighbors, and our enemies laugh among themselves. And then here's the refrain on the song, restore us, O God of hosts, let your face shine that we may be saved. Do you see how verse 7 is the same as verse 3? That's the refrain of the song. Now watch verse 8. You brought a vine out of Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it. It took deep root and filled the land. So Here, the psalmist compares the Exodus and the birth of the nation of Israel to God doing some horticultural work. He takes a vine that's growing where? In Egypt, and he transplants it. He picks it up and he moves it, and he moves it to new soil. He's going to start a new vineyard. So we're going to take the vines of France and move them to California. That's what we're going to do. That's what happened, right? So we're going to take this vine that's growing in Egypt and we're going to take it and move it over here to Canaan. He planted it, he cleared the ground for it, it took deep root, and it filled the land. The mountains were covered with its shade, the mighty cedars with its branches. It sent out its branches to the sea and its shoots to the river. That's the Euphrates, a mention of the Euphrates there. So in other words, this vine that God planted, this vineyard that God established, flourished. It grew prominent, it grew tall, it grew widely. It was prospering, it was beautiful, it was substantial. But why then have you broken down its walls so that all who pass along the way pluck its fruit? The boar from the forest ravages it, and all that move in the field feed on it. So the vineyard is subject to attack. It's no longer protected. It's being decimated. This beautiful plant that God has made that came out of Egypt, this new nation he created, is now being ravaged and destroyed. It's not protected anymore. It's being killed. Turn again, O God of hosts. Look down from heaven and see. Have regard for this vine, the stock that your right hand planted, for the son whom you have made strong for yourself. Whoa, wait a minute. What does the psalmist call Israel here? He calls it the vine, and he calls it the what? The son. Israel is the son of God. Now that's language you may not be really familiar with. You might not have thought, if we put up on a sort of one of, if we had a church sign out front that had the sermon title up and we put the Son of God, you might say, well, we're going to hear a sermon today about Jesus. But you might come in and hear, if you heard a sermon about the history of Israel, you might go, well, wait a minute, I thought we were having a sermon about the Son of God. But God calls Israel his son. And he does this first in Exodus. Remember, where's the vine come from? Egypt. So God calls Israel his son. Where does he call Israel his son in Exodus? He does this to Pharaoh. You've probably, even if you haven't read Exodus, you've seen the movie. And you know what Charlton Heston says to Yul Brynner. He says in front of him, let my people go. But in Exodus, he says, let my son go. Remember, okay, what was Pharaoh doing to the baby boys of Israel? He was killing them. And God comes to Pharaoh and he says, you are killing my son, and therefore your firstborn will die. That's what happens in the Passover. And he says, my son must go free. Israel is regarded as God's son. So, what the psalmist says here is that God's vine is God's son, and it is called out of Egypt and grows tall and is then cut down. Ooh. Wait a minute. A son of God called out of Egypt that grows tall and is then, what? Cut down. Turn again, O God of hosts, look down from heaven and see. Have regard for this vine, the stock that your right hand has planted, the son whom you have made strong for yourself. They have burned it with fire, they've cut it down. May they perish at the rebuke of your face. But let your hand be on the man of your right hand. What does God call Israel here? The man of your right hand. Oh, okay. Let's say the creed together. And on the third day, rose again, and ascended into heaven, and sitteth on the... Oh! Where does that language come from in the creed? He is seated at the right hand. Well, it comes from Acts 2. It comes from Psalm 80. Because who is the Son who is at the right hand? Who is the Son of the right hand? Who is the vine of God? Who is the one who came out of Egypt and grew strong and then was cut down? And then when he was cut down, God looked upon him and did something. Let your hand be on the man of your right hand, on the... Who? Verse 17, the Son of Man. Wait a minute, who always referred to himself as the Son of Man? Yeah, oh, on the Son of Man, whom you have made strong for yourself. Then we shall not turn back from you. Give us life, and we will call upon your name. Restore us, O Lord of hosts. Let your face shine on us that we may be saved. There's the refrain again. It's a prayer for restoration. We were taken out of Egypt. We flourished and grew strong. We were cut down and sent into exile. Out of exile, God do what? Restore us, resurrect us, so that salvation may come. Who lived this story? Who is the vine? This is why in John 15, Jesus says, I am what? The vine. I am the vine. I'm the ultimate Israel. I'm the true vine. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, the troops come to destroy him. Right? But he escapes. Joseph is warned in a dream. Where did Joseph, Mary, and Jesus flee to? Egypt. And then when the Herodian dynasty that was seeking to destroy him, that Herod was dead, they come back from Egypt in their own exodus, and they settle in Nazareth. And it says in Matthew, and this was fulfilled, that the scriptures might be fulfilled, out of Egypt have I called my son. So Jesus comes out of Egypt and is planted, and he grows. And then when he is at the peak of his ministry, teaching Israel about the vineyard, he is cut down. But does God leave him in the grave? No. What does God do? He raises him up. But how was he cut down? Who put Jesus to death? Who nailed him to the cross? Romans. And was it in Jerusalem, or did he was he marched out of Jerusalem bearing his cross? Which one was it? Out. What is he doing by carrying his cross out of Jerusalem? He is doing what? He is going into exile under the foreign oppressors. But God will not leave him in the grave. God will never leave the vine dead. Again, remember Isaiah chapter 11? The tree is cut down, but out of the stump, the root of Jesse grows a what? This stem. There it is in the very picture. Christ is the true vine. There is desolation which comes. And Jesus in his teaching in John chapter 15 says that he is the vine. He's the ultimate fulfillment of all this imagery. And you and I are joined to him. And there are two alternatives for the vineyard. There is fruitfulness or barrenness. We too can simply be wild grapes. Jesus says in John 15 that the branches that don't bear fruit are what? They're cut off. But the branches that do bear fruit are what? Pruned. So cut off and burned or pruned. The Lord says those are your only two choices. Don't you wish there was a third? Because have you ever seen a pruned vine? Now, I don't have a picture to show you, but those of you who were in the John study will remember when we got to John 15, I put up an image of a pruned vine. Do you remember what a pruned vine looked like? It looks like a cross. It looks just like a cross. because it's growing up out of the ground and the branches are running along the lines, but they prune it all back and all you see is a cross. What pruning takes place is ours in Christ, and it is the fruit of the cross which is borne out in our lives. So this Old Testament and New Testament theology of the vineyard has to be borne in mind. What Jesus is doing is taking the story, the narrative of Israel, and he's bringing it all into himself. He is the Son of Man in Psalm 80. He is the vine that God planted. Jesus, in his life and ministry, recapitulates over and over again the history of Israel in himself. And by his resurrection, he is showing what God has done for Israel and will do for all people. Because ultimately, the story of Isaiah's vineyard is the story not just of Judah, but of the whole of humanity. That God will bring restoration and life from the dead. All right, let's go back to Isaiah 5. So now with that kind of background, let's look at the song and read it together. Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of its stones and planted it with choice vines and built a watchtower in the midst of it. And he hewed out a wine vat in it, and he looked for it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. Now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? Now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, it will be devoured. I will break down its wall, it will be trampled down. I'll make it a waste, it will not be pruned or hoed, and briars and thorns will grow up, and I will command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. And he looked for justice, but behold, bloodshed. He looked for righteousness, but behold, an outcry. All right. Now, what is all of this about? Well, first of all, right at the heart of it is how God describes the fruit he was looking for. And there's a little play on words here, and you can note this under Roman numeral number 3 in your outline. Verse 7, the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. The men of Judah are his pleasant planting. I looked for what? Justice, but if you're filling in the blanks, it's mizpat. Mizpat. Let me put it up here. I looked for mizpat. Okay? I looked for mizpat. But what did he find? Bloodshed, okay? Which is mizpah. I looked for mizpat, and I've only found what? Mizpah. So it's a rhyming that's going on in the lyric. It's there in the Hebrew, but we don't pick up on it in English. I looked for mizpat, but found only mizpah. I looked for, what's the next word? Righteousness. This is a very sort of anglicized spelling of the Hebrew word, tzedakah. I looked for righteousness, tzedakah, all right? That's what I looked for. And what did he find? Seaska. I looked for tzedakah and found seaska. So there's rhyme that's going on here in the song. I looked for justice, but behold bloodshed. I looked for righteousness, but behold injustice. So that's the play on words that's going on here. What does that look like? What does that look like? Well, in verses 8 through 12, we get the thing that God sees in Judah. Woe to those who join house to house, add field to field, until there is no more room, and you are made to dwell alone in the midst of the land. The Lord of hosts has sworn in my hearing, surely many houses will be desolate, large and beautiful houses without inhabitant. For 10 acres of vineyard shall yield but one bath, and a homer of seed shall yield but an ephah. Woe to those who rise early in the morning that they may run after strong drink and tarry late into the evening as wine inflames them. They have lyre and harp, tambourine and flute and wine at their feasts, but they do not regard the deeds of the Lord or see the work of his hands. Well, what do we have here? Well, first of all, we have the pursuit of material possession. Remember those M's from the previous study? One of them was materialism. And what happens in verses 8 and 9 is a description of people buying up property and joining property to property and then putting their house right in the middle of the large property. And they're doing it in such a way that people are forced to the margins. So there is a housing development plan that the wealthy have cultivated, which says we will exclude people from us. In other words, if you build your own personal empire and you make it so large that you can't hear the neighbors, let's push them aside. Let's get as far away from people as we can. And then there's the pursuit of intoxication and revelry. There's, you know, it's the old saying, you can't drink all day if you don't start it in the morning, right? All right. So verse 11, get up early in the morning, start drinking, drink all night, have the partying music, but forget all about God. So what happens, he says, is that the land hungry end up being hungry. Their fields that they purchase don't produce what they wanted them to produce. What happens then? Here's judgment. My people will go into what? Exile. Because of a lack of knowledge. Their honored men go hungry, and their multitude is parched with thirst. Sheol has enlarged its appetite and opened its mouth beyond measure. What's Sheol, everybody? That's the realm of the dead. Okay, the Greeks had a term for it called Hades, which is translated in English as hell. All right? Hell has opened its mouth. All right? Now, I don't want you to lose sight of that idea of death being something that eats. The realm of the dead is hungry, and it eats. All right? Because that's going to be a figure that comes up later in the Bible and in Isaiah about death being eaten. But right now, death is introduced to us as something which is hungry, and it eats people. And it's got a big appetite. So, the nobility of Jerusalem and her multitude will go down, and the revelers, the party animals, and he who exults in her. Man is humbled. Each one is brought low. The eyes of the haughty are brought low. But the Lord of hosts is exalted. He is exalted in justice, and the holy God shows himself in what? Righteousness. There's those terms again. Mishpat and Tzedakah. That's where they show up again. Okay, justice and righteousness. God looked for it and didn't find it, but he will bring it about. He will bring about justice and righteousness. And then shall the lambs graze in their pasture, and the nomads eat among the ruins of the rich. All right. So, what we have next then in this particular section are woes that come upon Israel that make them a land of desolation. So you see these woes. Let me just point them out to you. The beginning of verse 18, see it? Woe to those who draw iniquity, right? And then verse 20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Verse 21, woe to those who are wise in their own eyes. Verse 22, woe to those, and so on. This is the language of lamentation and judgment. And Jesus uses this language in Matthew 23, talking about who? The scribes and the Pharisees. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. And he repeats this very same pattern. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. And then he describes these various judgments. He uses exactly the same pattern in Matthew 23 as Isaiah chapter 5. And when Jesus was doing that, they knew it. How well do you suppose the Pharisees and the Sadducees knew Isaiah chapter 5? So when Jesus goes, woe to you, woe to you, woe to you, they know the song. Remember, this is a song. How well do people know their songs? Right? They know the song. They knew the hymn. And when Jesus does this, all right, they are remembering, oh, we look good on the outside, but what? Inside, we're what? A disaster. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees! You are whitewashed tombs. On the outside you look what? Polished and clean, but inside, dead men's bones. Woe to you. So this language of woe is a prophetic language which Jesus employs in his own ministry. And he does it in connection with cursing something. He curses the fig tree in Matthew 21, and then Matthew 21 through 23, just make this in your notes. It's not on your study guide, just note it. Matthew 21 through 23, Jesus tells the people how God's judgment is coming. And do you know what figure he uses to describe the coming of the kingdom and judgment? A vine and a vineyard, and laborers in the vineyard. So he does that in Matthew 21 through 23, and he gets to Matthew 23, and he says, woe, 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 repeating this Isaiah pattern to the scribes and the Pharisees. And then all the disciples turn to Jesus. This is the beginning of Matthew 24. It's all a big unit. And at the beginning of Matthew 24, they say, Jesus, see the temple? See these beautiful buildings? This is Matthew 24, verse 1. And Jesus says, do you see all these buildings? Not one stone will be left on top of another. And Jesus begins to tell them what's going to happen to Jerusalem, that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. When was the destruction of Jerusalem that Jesus prophesied? 70 AD. The Romans came in and destroyed it, and the people went into exile. When Jesus said to the Pharisees and the Sadducees in Matthew 23, woe, 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 he's repeating Isaiah 5. And Isaiah prophesied that that very shortly thereafter, what was going to come? Exile. That's what happened. And Jesus repeats the pattern, and then in Matthew 24 prophesies the destruction of Jerusalem and the coming exile of the people of God. Jesus picks up this pattern here in Isaiah, and he repeats it. And Matthew makes this really, really strikingly clear in a big literary unit that runs Matthew 21 through the end of Matthew 24. And central in that teaching is Jesus' instruction about the vineyard. What are the reason for the woes? Here's the first one, a disregard for God's holiness. That's the H, holiness. Woe to those who draw iniquity with cords of falsehood, who draw sin as with cart ropes, who say, let him be quick. Let him speed with his work that we may see it. Let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw near, and let it come that we may know it. There's a disregard for God's holiness. Here's the second thing, a disregard for God's law. Verse 20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. To call evil good and good evil is to disregard the word of the Lord and to substitute our personal opinions for God's revelation. So we're going to have our own standards of right and wrong. This is happening everywhere today. And incredibly, it's happening all over the church today, where people are looking at God's word and going, yeah, but it doesn't really mean that anymore. This is constant. It's incredible to me how much this is going on. Here's a third thing, disregard for God's wisdom. Woe to those who are wise where? In their own eyes, and shrewd in their own sight. We don't need God's wisdom, we've got our own. A disregard for God's justice, verse 22. Woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine, valiant men at mixing strong drink, who acquit the guilty for a bribe and deprive the innocent of his right. So there's a disregard for justice. Justice is perverted. Remember, there's violence. There's the oppression of the poor. And now we find that the justice system is perverted by what? By finances, by bribes. This is a culture in which the wealthy have power and the marginalized are oppressed, and everything looks great, but underneath the surface, this oppression, this bribery, is cultivating, the root of its arrogance is cultivating the seeds of a coming demolition. It's going to come down. The result is exile. The result is exile. Verse 24, therefore, as the tongue of fire devours the stubble, and as dry grass sinks down in the flame, that's a great image, so their root will be as rottenness, and their blossom go up like dust. God's going to set a wildfire in a dry field. It's just going to spread. They have rejected, there's that fire image again. They have rejected the law of the Lord of hosts. They've despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. Right there in verse 24, in those two lines, is the central issue. They've chosen their wisdom over God's wisdom. They've rejected God's word and taken up their own standards. When the people of God reject the word of God and they choose their own ways and their own wisdom, they are ripe for God's fire. But it's not the fire of revival, it's the fire of demolition, which burns everything to the ground. That, remember, a shoot may rise from the stump. So there's the therefore judgment. It's God's fire in verse 24. Verse 25, therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled, that's fire language again, against his people. He stretched out his hand against them and struck them, and the mountains quaked, and their corpses were as refuse in the midst of the streets. For all this his anger has not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. So verse 25, it's God's power. It's like an earthquake. Now, there actually was an earthquake, a great earthquake in the days of King Uzziah. So perhaps Isaiah is referencing that because he begins his prophetic ministry in the year that King Uzziah died. So maybe he's saying, do you remember the great earthquake? Do you remember the demolition of that? There's a fire coming. There's an earthquake coming, and it's going to destroy. It's going to demolish. That's what's coming. It's God's fire, and it's God's power. And that kind of imagery shows up in the other prophets in Amos and Zechariah. I've listed a couple of passages there where you can look at it. So how would we summarize this? Well, we would say that God's judgment looks like this. It looks like the earth shaking, Sheol being opened, and exile taking place. How will that occur? It will happen through an invading army. Verse 26. God will raise a signal for nations far away and whistle for them from the ends of the earth. And behold, quickly, speedily they come. What do you whistle for to come? A dog. And that's the image here. God's going to whistle. And he's going to whistle for the Assyrians. And he's going to whistle for the Babylonians. Now, we have a dog. And we whistle. But the dog rarely comes. In fact, to get the dog to come, we have to call the horse's name. Because the dog is possessed by a spirit of jealousy. And so when it hears the horse's name, it doesn't want the horse to have any attention, so it comes. So that it will have the attention and not the horse. The Babylonians and the Assyrians, however, are far more obedient than my dog. The Babylonians and the Assyrians, when they hear God whistle, come how? Speedily. Hastily. Verse 27, none of them are weary, none of them stumble, they don't even sleep. Not a waistband is loose, not a sandal strap is broken, their arrows are sharp and their bows are bent, and their horses' hooves seem like flint, and their wheels are like the whirlwind, and their roaring is like a lion. Like young lions they roar, they growl and seize their prey and carry it off, and no one can rescue from their hand, and they growl over it on that day like the growling of the sea. And if one looks to the land, behold, darkness and distress, and the light is darkened by the clouds. What does judgment look like? It looks like an earthquake, and it looks like death opening up, and it looks like exile, and it looks like the sun being blotted out in the middle of the day. When was there exile like that? And when was there an earthquake? And when did the sun go out in the middle of the day? And when did death open up its mouth to receive and eat, and then found that what it had eaten it couldn't hold and vomited it back? So there was a Friday afternoon just outside Jerusalem when the vine, the Son of Man, went into exile. And as he hung on the cross, the sun went out and the earth quaked and death opened its mouth. In prophetic word, there are always two stages of fulfillment: an immediate fulfillment and an ultimate fulfillment in Christ. Judah experienced all of this. They did. The Babylonians came and they went into exile, and the land suffered desolation. And then, after the Babylonians came the Medes and the Persians, and they, under King Cyrus, and we'll read about that later in Isaiah, send them back. They have a resurrection. They come back to the land. They come back from the dead. That's the immediate fulfillment of Isaiah's words. But was it the ultimate fulfillment? No. Because the Son of Man, the vine that's called out of Egypt, the one who said, I am the vine, he's the one who goes ultimately into exile, and under whose blood the earth quaked, and death opened its mouth, and the sun went out in the middle of the day. All the words of the prophets, Jesus said on the road to Emmaus, are about who? Jesus said they're about me, and they are. All right, let's stop there. We've gotten to the end of Isaiah 5, and we'll pick up the rest of it next week.